Imagine a freezing night in São Paulo, the wind cutting through everything, cars locked shut, and a barefoot boy weaving between them. In his arms, he carries a little girl, his sister, coughing hard, face pale, fighting to stay awake. This is Rafael. Just 9 years old, already crushed by the weight of the world. His parents died in a fire, he lives under a bridge, and he'd do anything to save his little sister, Isabela. Amidst the honking and hurried stares, no one seems to see these children until a luxury car stops right in front of him. Inside, Artur, a cold millionaire, worn out by life, was just trying to escape his own problems. When Rafael asks for help, Artur is suspicious, offers him a quick buck, but Rafael won't take it. Instead, he hands over a crumpled note, shaky words. "Please, save my sister. I'll do anything." What's in that note that makes Artur hesitate? Will he walk away and forget? Or is tonight about to change 3 lives forever? Stay here, because what happens next is simply unbelievable. The city never sleeps. But that night, the cold felt worse, sparing neither rich nor poor. Rafa walked slowly, breathing in the icy air that burned his chest. He looked at the parked cars, lights reflected on the wet asphalt from the drizzle earlier. People inside the cars, warm, fiddling with radios, laughing, scrolling on their phones. The warmth in their might as well belonged to another world. In his arms, wrapped in a tattered blanket that looked more like an old towel, Isabela coughed. Softly, muffled. Her tiny, thin face rested on her brother's shoulder, her skinny hand clutching his neck as if Rafael was the only safe thing left in the world. Isabela's big eyes blinked slowly. Sometimes she whimpered, and her cry barely made a sound, just that small moan of pain and exhaustion. Only Rafa truly heard it. He was barefoot, feeling the chill of the avenue floor hitting right to the bone. With every step, a new pebble, a splash from a filthy puddle, other people's shoes passing close by. His pants were too short, gray and trembling on his legs. The wind came from everywhere, slicing through him. It wasn't just cold, it was not having anyone left to ask for a sweater. People hurried past, eyes fixed on their own path, avoiding him. Some drivers sped through a red light just to get away. Street vendors tried to smile over their sadness. Everyone struggling to make it, but almost nobody saw Rafael. They only glimpsed a barefoot boy holding a sick girl. You could see the fear on Rafa's face. Not fear of bad people, not of the police. A different kind, a fear that lives in silence, that wakes when you realize there's no one left. He looked at his sister, looked at the cars, looked at the sky, and the sky didn't answer. Sometimes the pain was so great there wasn't even room to think about what to do next. There was only the question, is ISA going to get worse again tonight? His stomach growled. But all he could think was, I need to get money for the medicine. Down by the bridge where he and ISA slept, it wasn't always peaceful. Other homeless people fought, shouted, sometimes argued over nothing. Rafael tried to shield his sister, using his own body as a barrier when the wind got even worse. At night, the noise of the traffic rolled overhead, making it easy to forget that someone so small was right there. The city sparkled, full of lights, shop windows with candy and toys. Inside the cars, people in nice sweaters, new coats, scented with perfume. On the outside glass, only the reflection of the boy, messy hair, skin worn from going way too long without a real bath. The contrast was sharp. 2 worlds side by side, each pretending the other didn't exist. Rafael didn't want charity. He walked with his head high, even though he was trembling all over. He kept looking ahead, gently tapping on windows, his hand already sore from trying so much. He tried to smile at the drivers, showed his little bag of candies. But before he could even speak, most people had already turned away. A woman glanced at him with pity, but drove off. A man didn't even bother to hide his disdain, locking the window, checking his watch. Each rejection hurt a little more. Still, Rafael's gaze didn't change much. It was like, without realizing it, he'd built an invisible shield. Pretend it doesn't hurt. Pretend it's just another day. When he stopped beside a motorcycle or a younger person, hope flickered. Sometimes people gave him a forced smile, pretended to look for coins, but never got back to him. ISA's coughs grew harsher. He felt like sitting down to cry, but he couldn't. She needed strength. She needed her brother. Even in the small things, the cold was there. Every time Rafael pulled the blanket tighter around Isabela, his hands shook. Her hair was damp with cold sweat. A few strands stuck to her thin face. Rafa gently brushed them aside, passing his thumb over a tear rolling down. Around him, the noise of traffic mixed with the silence of people who didn't want to hear. The whole night felt like a hunk of ice, everyone just trying to survive as best they could. A big car stopped nearby, shiny, black, like something out of a movie. Rafael looked over, half curious, half hopeless. He saw his own face reflected in the tinted window, saw the sunken, tired eyes, saw his sister writhing in pain in his arms. He looked around. There was no other choice. His supply of hope was running low, and time was slipping away like rain down the drain. Isa's medicine was expensive, the day was ending, and no one seemed willing to see two siblings hidden beneath so much neglect. Still, Rafa took slow steps toward the fancy car. Before he approached, he drew a deep breath, trying to hold back his tears. Deep inside, he found the last scrap of courage his mother had always told him to save for the bad days. He gently wiped his sister's face, hid the sadness, and stood there. Two worlds. The cold of those who sleep outside. The indifference of those watching from afar. And, in the middle of that freezing avenue, the silence belonged only to them, as if the world had chosen to forget that children get cold, get hungry, and feel longing. The cold seemed to hammer even harder when the wind whipped Rafael's face, cutting into his thin skin. He looked at the candy bag in his hand. Just a few colorful wrappers left, all stuck together since it had rained earlier and the paper was a bit damp. He adjusted Isabela in his arms. She was so light, like a feather, and yet carrying her weight so much. The little one was curled up, icy hands clutching a blanket that barely warmed, her nose red. Her cough cut through the silence, shaking Rafael's chest. But he tried to ignore it, because if he thought too much about her pain, he wouldn't be able to walk. The light turned red at the corner. Rafael ran, his feet nearly splitting from so much dirt and injury. He went to the nearest car, tapped lightly on the glass. Isabela was almost asleep from exhaustion. He showed the candies with a tired smile, trying to seem upbeat, but his eyes gave him away. An older lady saw him, made a face, and turned away. "Ma'am, would you buy a candy? Please? It's for my sister, she's sick." All he got was a quick gesture, no, and the window going up. The lady tapped at her phone as though Rafael didn't exist. He tried again at the next car, the man fiddling with his fancy watch, pretending to listen to music. The sound of traffic pressed on Rafael's chest. Sometimes the smell of exhaust would make Isabela cough even harder. His legs shook, and the shame stung. He looked at the ground, took a deep breath, wiped his runny nose on his arm, and repeated, over and over, "Candy, sir? Just one, please." No one answered. In his lap, Isabela gripped the old pillow they once found in the trash. She tried to be strong, but sometimes a sob escaped her and she whispered softly, barely wanting to bother him. "Rafa, I'm cold." He tucked the chewed-up sheet tighter around her and pressed his cheek to her hair, disguising his tears. He tried to sound firm, even as his voice cracked. "It's okay, Bella, soon we'll make it, all right? I promise." Every rejection fell on Rafael like a stone. His chest tightened, that feeling of being unseen, unheard, as if he were invisible. But inside, everything hurt. When he caught a glimpse of his reflection in a car window, he saw the dark circles under his eyes, his tangled hair, his thin and ripped-out clothes unfit for winter. He wanted to vanish, but then Isabela shifted and he remembered. She had only him. Time crawled by. He counted his coins in his hand, not enough even for bread. He felt the hunger and, worse, the fear. Fear that he couldn't get medicine. Fear of coming back under the bridge and finding his sister gasping for air. Fear of being all alone. At the light, a well-dressed woman stopped her car near him and pretended to search for something in her purse, avoiding meeting his gaze. Rafael hesitated, but tapped gently. "Ma'am, please, just a candy. My sister needs medicine." She looked now, but at Isabela's face, not his. Her gaze hardened, maybe pity, maybe shame. She handed over 2 coins, but didn't take any candy. She just muttered, "God help you." Rafael, his pride stinging, slipped the coins into his dirty pocket and offered her the candy anyway. The drizzle returned, that annoying kind that doesn't wash anything away, just makes things worse. Cars sped past, horns carving through the silent worlds inside them. Every closed door made Rafael wonder if any of those adults remembered they'd once been children themselves. He felt the tears well, but swallowed them, because he promised himself Isabela would never see him give up. Isabela's coughing worsened. She clutched her chest, little eyes squeezed tight with pain. Rafael felt desperation mount, and in those moments, he couldn't understand why no one saw that he wasn't begging. He just wanted to save his sister. That was all. The wind lashed again. He caught the scent of food drifting from some bar. His stomach grumbled loudly, and he looked at his sister, Maybe he should try another light, keep asking, anything. But today was tough. Cars didn't stop. Hope slipped away. His candy bag was almost empty now. His fingers ached from gripping it for so long. Rafael looked up at the sky, still cloudy, still dark. It felt like the universe had turned its back on them. He closed his eyes for a second, feeling a tear fall. Isabela noticed. She touched his face, so weakly. "Don't cry, Rafa." The way she spoke, so softly, all worn out, made him tremble. He held the bag tight, breathed in deep, and whispered to himself, more than to her. "I won't give up. Even if I stay here all night, I'm going to save you." Car headlights flashed on. More people crossed, more hurried glances, more indifference. An ambulance sped past in the distance, its siren crying along with the night. Rafael looked at the last candies as if they were all the hope he had left. His pride fought his need, but he kept going. Gave his best smile, though exhaustion showed plainly on his face. When he looked at Isabela and saw her trust in him, a thread of courage sparked in him, deep in his heart. That little girl, she was his whole world. And no one at that intersection, in that cold world, had any idea. The sound of traffic seemed even louder on that corner. Red and white lights blinking in Rafael's eyes as he tried to spot a less hard face behind the locked windows. He'd lost count of how many times he'd murmured, "It's still warm, sir. Would you buy a candy, please?" No one answered. Some looked at him in the mirror, some fiddled with their phones, and others sped up just to get away. He stopped, breathed slowly, looked at Isabela. His sister slept now, or tried to, burning with fever, her face pressed into his chest. He could feel the heat of her tiny body through his thin clothes, and that muffled cough, a rough, sad sound that sometimes burst out without warning. Only one row of cars remained. The last car in line stood out from afar, clean and glistening even under the heavy drizzle, a huge black Mercedes, completely different from the beaten-up cars around. Rafael crept toward it cautiously, feeling the cold stones tear at his bare feet. He trembled, clutched the candy bag with his free hand, fought off the urge to cry, "Not now." For a second, he imagined that maybe, just maybe, the man in that car might help. His mother used to say everyone's got a heart under all their layers. But he saw no heart in the man behind that dark glass. The man wore a suit that looked expensive, unlike anything Rafael had ever seen up close. His hair was neat, but a strand fell across his forehead like he'd just left a heavy argument. And he had, the sound of him on the phone, voice loud and irritated as if fighting with someone invisible inside. Rafael hesitated, stood still, almost gave up. But then Isabela stirred and let out one of those gut-deep coughs. A car splashed through a puddle, wind cut straight through Rafael's tiny body. He scraped together strength he didn't know he had and tapped the window, just once, afraid to scare the man. Inside, the man scowled and didn't even hang up the phone. He just sighed, kind of snorting, and slowly lowered the window. The car's leather smell rushed out, mixed with strong perfume, but not the warm kind, colder, somehow. The man looked at Rafael the same way most did, as if he were part of the street, invisible, an inconvenience, just another problem at the end of a rough day. Rafael struggled for a smile, so small it barely showed. "Good evening, sir. I just wanted to sell some candies. Wouldn't you like one?" His voice faltered mid-sentence, the fear obvious, with a dash of hope. The man looked at the candy bag and then at the boy's ragged clothes. His gaze landed on Isabela, who now lifted her head, half asleep, and coughed again, that dry, agonized sound. For a second, it looked like the man would shoo him away, like everyone else. His finger drummed on the steering wheel. His phone was blaring louder than ever, but he ignored the person at the other end and studied the skin of Rafael's face, the quivering jaw, the unusual way he held his sister, afraid to let go, afraid she'd slip away. The wind was colder now, and Rafael noticed just how exposed he was. He took a step back, almost apologetic. The Mercedes driver shook his head, as if he couldn't believe he was standing there listening, and barked something quick into the phone. He hung up in the caller's face. The silence was heavier than all the city's noise. He looked Rafael up and down, and the only thing that moved on his face was a muscle by his mouth, taut, as if he were angry. Rafael felt he had nothing left to say. He looked at Isabela, saw her sweaty face pressed to his chest, and felt it all again. Fear, hunger, shame. But this time, a tear slipped out. He didn't want to cry in front of anyone, but his body couldn't hold it in. And then, as if gathering courage for his sister, he pulled from his pocket a crumpled scrap of paper and handed it to the man's large hand, barely meeting his eyes. He didn't say anything. He just gave him the note. The man took the paper, almost disgusted, and opened it slightly, brow furrowed. Just one line. Please, save my sister. I'll do anything. Rafael stood waiting for any sign, anything. From the car behind, someone honked, annoyed with the delay. In that moment, something changed in the man's eyes. It could have been pity, exhaustion, or just the surprise of seeing the world wasn't as far away as he wanted. Where impatience had been, there was now a kind of shock. He held the note, looked at Isabela, at Rafael's thin arm clutching her so tightly, and took a long time to say anything. Only then did Rafael realize how truly frozen he was. His body trembled from the inside out, his hand hid the last of the candies, and his eyes pleaded with all the pride he'd never let himself show. The silence seemed endless. Finally, the man drew a deep breath, let it out with a sigh full of anger from the day, annoyance at the mess, and maybe a thread of compassion. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a bill, held it out the window, expression almost resentful. But Rafael shook his head, refused, went back to holding Isabela with both hands. Desperation made his eyes shine even brighter. The man's frown deepened, as if he could not believe the boy's refusal. But before anyone could speak, Isabela burst into a harsher fit of coughs, one of those that made Rafael's own chest ache. For a moment, the look of that powerful man wavered. It was clear that something had shifted beneath those thick walls he'd built around himself. He stared at the note again, at the two kids, and right then, luxury, the car, his commanding voice, none of it meant anything. There was only silence, broken only by Isabela's tiny cough and the faraway noise of a São Paulo that never stops, as if no one, except these three, even noticed that freezing night. Artur made no effort to hide his annoyance, not for a second. He looked at Rafael as if sizing up a nuisance, a head tilted slightly back, one eyebrow raised, mouth twisted in a touch of disdain. He jingled his car keys, impatient, eager to leave. Inside, the car was warm, filled with the smell of new leather and expensive cologne, shutting out anything from the street. Outside, all São Paulo shivered. Cold wind over wet asphalt, buses honking, people in a rush, nothing seemed beyond the bubble of one's own world. Rafael swallowed hard and asked, nearly whispering, if the man wanted a candy. Hope and an old fear mixed in his voice. The boy had no sweater, feet dirty and bruised, hair sticky against his forehead, big black eyes shining with anxiety and shame. He shifted Isabela in his lap because she'd started to squirm, uncomfortable. She let out a weak cough, covering her mouth with a grubby little hand. No 9-year-old should carry this kind of weight. Artur rolled his eyes, the way people do when they're sick of asking for quiet where hope's already run dry. He didn't answer right away. He just looked the boy up and down, scanning the clothes, the fingers, the nearly empty candy bag. He sighed, leaned back against the seat. And don't you know how to work? He blurted suddenly, cold, eyeing Rafael as if he'd spat those words out. His tone was harsh. You could hear the anger, though maybe, just maybe, there was a bit of weariness too. Artur didn't realize how deeply it cut. Rafael pressed his foot to the ground and felt the curb's icy water. He was trembling, not just from the cold, but something else. The boy looked down, breath caught. He held Isabela tight against his chest, as if he could shield her from what he'd just heard. His face showed a fear not just of not selling candy, but of losing even the last scraps of dignity that night. Isabela's coughs got worse. 3 attacks in a row, deep and long. Her whole body shook on her brother's lap, little eyes squeezed shut with pain, tears slipping out. Her coughing broke through the city's noise for a second. People passed by, ignored them, hurried across the street. One street vendor looked over from a distance, but nobody really cared. Artur gripped the wheel tightly, jaw clenched. He pretended none of it got to him. Pretended it was just another case, just another kid bugging him at a red light. But something was bothering him. Something stirred inside. His look, all scorn until a moment ago, now lingered on Rafael's weary face. Maybe, for the first time, Artur took in the purple shadows under the boy's eyes, the way he tried to hide his anguish while rocking his sister gently, whispering, "Easy, Bella, it's okay." The wind picked up. A candy wrapper blew from the filthy bag and landed by the car's tire. Isabela curled up tighter, her tiny fingers grabbing her brother's shirt, hunting for warmth where there was none. Rafael bit his lip, forcing the tears back down. Strange to think, for a moment, the distance between him and Artur felt like an entire ocean. One of them safe and shut inside his car, surrounded by everything. The other outside, nearly empty-handed with just his sister and a last bit of hope. A truck blared its horn, making Artur jump a bit. He looked back at Rafael, face a little less severe, though his voice stayed cold. This isn't living. You have to work. Not stand around begging at the stoplight, he muttered, softer, almost to himself. But maybe even he felt the weight of saying that to a 9-year-old boy with a sick child on his lap. For a second, doubt flickered in his eyes. Rafael didn't answer. He was fighting to keep from crying, trying not to shake. He awkwardly stroked Isabela's hair, cold hands trembling. He looked at Artur, almost begging in silence for at least a bit of humanity. Maybe that was all. Inside the car, Artur's phone buzzed again, a message glowing on the screen. He ignored it. Looked at the dark street outside, then back at Rafael. This time his gaze lingered. He saw the fatigue, the cracked lips from cold, the shame of being there. Behind them, a driver shouted for him to move. But right then, time felt odd for Artur. Something heavy pressed inside, though he tried not to show it. Maybe he remembered something old he didn't want to recall. Maybe it was just nameless guilt. Rafael realized he wouldn't get a good answer here. He gripped the candy bag tighter, repositioned Isabela on his lap. She was panting now, eyes glazed, chest rising and falling too quickly. He was outside the car, but further from safety than ever. And Artur, surrounded by comfort, seemed even further away from understanding so much pain. The light changed again. Impatient people flashed their high beams. Rafael stood still, torn between trying again, heading back to the curb, or just disappearing into the crowd. Artur, inside, turned towards his window, but paused before leaving. Something hard to ignore gnawed at him. He could have tossed a coin out, sent them away. But it was tough to look away now. Outside, Isabela's cough echoed softly. Rafael closed his eyes, clung tight, and breathed as if it was his last shot. And the silence between all three, Rafael, Isabela, and Artur, stretched a lifetime, while each one waited, in their own way, for a small miracle. The window of Artur's car was still a little open, but the biting wind slid through anyway, pulling in the smell of nearby rain and old gasoline. The boy at the window looked even smaller now. Rafael clung to his sister as if he could protect Isabela not only from the cold, but from the whole world. The girl coughed again, rough, not just the sound of pain, but of fear too. A fear too old for someone so small. Artur took a deep breath, grabbed his wallet, took out some bills, more than the boy would earn in weeks of selling candy. He did it quickly, automatically, as if striking an item off his to-do list. He stuck the money through the window gap, the bills almost blowing away in the wind. Go on, boy, take it. Take your girl to the hospital, he said, without really looking at Rafael. I said on the traffic ahead. But Rafael didn't move. He only looked at the cash as if it were a trap. Under the dirty glare of the street lamp and the headlights, his face didn't look like that of a kid who'd found what he desperately needed. Quite the opposite. His lips trembled, eyes sunken and red, more from worry than cold. Carefully, as though carrying diamonds, he reached into the deep pocket of his torn shorts. When his hand came out, it wasn't money, it was a note, a dirty, crumpled scrap of paper. Rafael held it out to Artur. His hand shook, but it was as if that slip of paper held his only remaining hope. He spoke softly, almost a whisper, not to wake Isabela in his arms. Sir, I don't want your money. Just, please read this. Artur stepped back a little, confused. You could tell that a man who signs million-dollar contracts every day wasn't used to handwritten notes from street kids. He took the paper. The tips of his fingers brushed against Rafael's icy hand. It lasted only a second, but you couldn't help but feel the distance between their two worlds, the softness of cared-for skin and the rough, battered hand of someone who'd spent too many nights holding onto the pavement. Before opening the note, Artur looked at Rafael. The boy kept his gaze down, shoulders slumped as if he already expected a no, or worse, a scolding at any moment. Isabela let out another whimper, curling up tighter on her brother's chest. The note was dirty, stained, some of the letters smudged. The handwriting was shaky, childlike, as if each letter was an effort, every word a silent cry for help from someone who didn't even know how to ask anymore. Please, save my sister. I'll do anything. Artur read it slowly. The sentence was simple, but it hit differently. His finger traced the paper without him realizing, like he was searching for some hidden truth there. When he finished, he looked back at the boy. The silence between them got heavy. The noise from Avenida Paulista, the honking, the distant sirens, everything seemed far away, muffled. Rafael's face was wet. He wasn't sobbing. The tears just fell quietly, like he didn't want to show even more weakness. No child should know how to cry that way, without a sound, as if crying itself was dangerous. Isabela stirred, face burrowed in her brother's chest, her skinny, grimy arms wrapped around his neck. The smell coming off them was a mix of cold, sweat, a hint of pigeon droppings, cheap soap. Only those who've slept under a bridge know that smell. A man behind them honked, irritated that the car was stopped so long. Artur didn't even answer. He just stared at the note in his hand, the sentence pounding in his head. He could feel his heart beating differently. It was as if something deep inside him was tugging at some long-buried thread, an echo of pain he tried to bury beneath years and profit margins. For a moment, he saw the face of another child, someone he hadn't thought about for years, but the image faded as quickly as it came, along with his anger from earlier that day. From the outside, anyone would have sworn Artur was just standing there, cold as ever. But inside, his hand was shaking. That feeling of not knowing what to do, not even knowing how to answer a plea like that. Because right then, for the first time in ages, Artur realized that money couldn't buy what was being asked. This wasn't about selling candy, wasn't a request for spare change. This was someone really, truly begging for help. Every word from that note stuck to him, like gum to the bottom of his shoe. Rafael looked up, braced for anything, a yell, a put down, anything to break the silence. But Artur just wiped his face, trying to hide the lump in his throat. The scent of rain grew stronger. A few drops started to hit the windshield. He handed the money back, rested his hand on the steering wheel, but his eyes stayed glued to the note. He just sat there, feeling the weight of responsibility, wondering if he still had enough courage to turn his back now. And Rafael, still frozen by the window, just wanted, for a single second, to be seen not as a beggar, but as a brother. On that cold night, the biggest ask wasn't for charity. It was for someone who still believed in them. Inside the car, no one spoke. Only the window fogged by warm breath. Only the muffled sounds of the street seeping in through cracks. Artur gripped the wheel with both hands, letting the crumpled note rest on the passenger seat, as if that filthy scrap of paper weighed a ton. Outside, life kept moving. Horns, headlights, people shouting offers, motorcycles weaving between cars. But inside that BMW, time froze. Even the engine seemed to stop humming. Artur looked in the rearview mirror, and for a second, all he saw was his own reflection. Tired, eyes red from the earlier argument. But soon Rafael's image appeared, standing on the curb, meeting Artur's gaze with a strange kind of bravery. And in his arms, the little girl's face, much too small, far too limp, coughing without even enough strength to cry out. The note echoed in Artur's mind. Please, save my sister. I'll do anything. The messy, half-smeared handwriting. The backwards F, the Q bigger than the rest. Such a simple, direct plea. No price tag, nothing up for negotiation. It was life or death, scribbled on a piece of paper. He closed his eyes for a moment and just listened to the heavy sound of his own breathing. Somewhere, memories of his daughter barged in uninvited. Her hair, the smell of her bedroom, the weight of carrying her on his shoulders on some forgotten Sunday. Those Sundays never came back. When Artur opened his eyes, a tear threatened to burn at the corner. He quickly wiped his face, like he could erase the feelings away. Men don't cry, especially businessmen like him. But right then, he wasn't a businessman. He wasn't rich. He was nothing. He couldn't stop thinking, what if that was my daughter out there, coughing in her desperate brother's arms? Suddenly, anger surged back. Anger at the world, at scams, at all the sad stories that always knocked at his car window. How many stories had he heard by now? How many times had he stopped to be suspicious, made a sour face, hit the gas to forget? He tried to shift the car into gear, but his hand faltered. The sound of pedestrians crowded on the sidewalk, vendors arguing, a woman asking if he wanted to buy water. Artur didn't answer, just fixed his gaze back on the rearview mirror. Rafael didn't budge, kept holding his sister even tighter, staring straight at Artur. Isabela made a little noise, tried to cough, and Rafael gently patted her back, like you see health workers do on TV. In Artur's chest lay a new weight, a kind of emptiness he'd pretended not to feel for months, maybe years. He wondered if maybe it was all a lie, maybe some act to get money. How many men fell for stories like these? Gullible people, ready to be taken advantage of. But the fear on that boy's face was no lie. That couldn't be faked, not here, not on a night this cold. Rafael's fingers were red from the cold, bare, no socks, barefoot. The way he hesitated as he handed over the note, like asking for help, hurt more than any scrape. Deep down, Artur knew he had to decide right now. If he pretended not to see, he might never sleep well again. If he helped, he could regret it. Things could go wrong. Life punishes those who get involved. But what if that little girl died? He wouldn't be able to forget, even if he wanted to. On a sudden impulse, Artur unbuckled his seatbelt. The click sounded like an explosion in the quiet car. He pushed the door open, feeling the cold air hit his skin, the sounds of the street suddenly sharp again. Rafael stepped back, expecting to be yelled at, maybe chased away like always. But Artur simply motioned with his hand and said, "Show me where you stay." His voice came out gruff, stuck in his chest, part plea, part command. He saw the doubt and fear in Rafael's eyes. The boy hugged his sister tighter, hesitated, looking at him as if to say, "Can I trust you?" He took a long time. Isabela coughed again, her little body weak. Finally, Rafael nodded, turned his back and started walking, slow, wary, glancing back every few steps. Artur followed. Cold pavement under expensive shoes, strangers stealing glances. Strange to see a man in a suit trailing behind a filthy street kid on a busy avenue. Artur's heart was beating funny. It wasn't fear, not the kind of adrenaline that comes with sealing a deal. It was a knot, one that wouldn't come loose. Sometimes he nearly stopped walking. He imagined his own daughter in that situation, couldn't push away the thought. He felt angry at himself for never truly seeing other people's pain. They turned down an alley, passed under an overpass. The air reeked of garbage, burnt plastic, everything damp from the night dew. The wind swept along cardboard, lifted dust. It was remarkable how much darker and sadder the world seemed under that bridge. Nobody spoke. Silence weighed on them. The fear weighed even more. Artur thought of turning back. His head screamed, "What are you doing? This isn't your problem." But deep down, he knew. It was his problem now. Because he'd seen. Because now, he couldn't pretend anymore. Up ahead, the boy stopped in a corner, cradling his sister gently, like a mother would. His eyes lost, exhausted, but something glimmered there, hoping, just a little. Artur felt everything inside him spin, memories, guilt, even a sudden urge to cry, something he didn't think he could feel anymore. For the first time in ages, he felt he was where he was supposed to be. He didn't know what he'd find, didn't know if he could truly help, but he decided, right there on that wet street, that this time, he'd see it through. Artur left his car, swallowing the night cold and the drone of engines behind him. The boy had already set off ahead, fast, holding his sister as if she were made of glass. The ground was slick, slippery, and every one of Rafael's steps tapped the asphalt like a racing heartbeat. Artur had never walked that sidewalk before, never really looked at what existed beneath São Paulo's bridges. They passed a closed diner, then two dogs fighting. Rafael looked over his shoulder, wary, but didn't stop. Artur barely had time to consider giving up. And there, in the strange silence of the last hours before dawn, all you could hear was the wind pushing litter down the street and the little girl's congested cough. When they reached their spot, Rafael knelt down without ceremony. It was a cramped rectangle under a massive pillar, water dripping endlessly from a leak overhead. The mattress, if you could call it a mattress, was propped against a graffiti-stained wall. One side was soaked, all blotched. The other, a blanket that maybe was colorful once but was now just gray. In the corner, a toy truck without wheels and a naked doll. A little container with dirty water sat in a bucket. There were even a few leftover pieces of yesterday's, maybe the day before's, bread. Isabela woke up coughing, that heavy, raspy cough no one could ignore. She stared into space, huge, red-rimmed eyes. Forced to smile when Rafael settled her onto the mattress, like she wanted to say it's okay, even when it was brutally clear nothing was okay. The cold wind swept in, making her cling to her brother even tighter, her fingers looking like twigs. Artur stood there for a while, not knowing where to put his hands. He breathed in the smell strong, mildew, sour, wet trash, and unwashed clothes. He remembered how his own suit always smelled of expensive cologne and leather, and for the first time ever, he felt ashamed of it. He looked at the ground, at the broken toys, the soaked mattress, trying to understand how any of this was even possible. Sometimes Isabela shook so hard the whole mattress wobbled. Her face was hot with fever, but she didn't complain, just stared toward the ceiling with a smothered fear, too tired to cry anymore. Rafael pulled the blanket and tried to cover his sister, but it was so thin it didn't help at all. Without a second thought, he pulled off his own tiny jacket and laid it over her. It was clear he'd done that 100 times before. He lay beside her, trying to warm his little sister with his own body. He looked at Artur from a distance without asking for anything. Just waited. Artur was never at a loss for words. But now, he felt a lump in his chest. He thought of his own son, of his little girl who wasn't there anymore, and it hurt. His face turned cold, frozen. He pretended he was unmoved, But inside every bone in his body wanted to run, except his gaze, which couldn't tear itself away from the kids. He saw the cut on Rafael's forehead, the scratch on Isabela's arm, the way they both tried to look strong, even when it was obvious they were falling apart inside. Rafael noticed. He sat quietly, eyes searching for a way out, some miracle. But there wasn't one. He just curled up, stroking his sister's back, whispering something in her ear, maybe an invented prayer. The little girl tried to smile, a weak half-smile, and slowly closed her eyes. The noise of traffic overhead was just a distant backdrop. Life's real soundtrack was right there beneath the bridge, the stolen hours of childhood, the silence of those who've learned not to expect good things. Artur felt a surge of anger at himself. Angry for never noticing. Angry at so much grime, so much indifference whizzing past these kids every single day. The boy tried to stifle a yawn, but tiredness won. He huddled closer to his sister, protecting her even in sleep. For a moment, his brave boy mask slipped, and he was just a scared little kid, far too small for this world. And Artur realized the deepest fear here wasn't the cold or the dark, it was being forgotten. The rain picked up, drumming on the sheet metal nearby. Artur couldn't hold back anymore. He stepped closer, bent down, and asked softly, "Do you get cold like this every night?" Rafael barely answered. He just looked up, eyes full of exhaustion, and nodded, as if to say, "That's just the way it is." There was no answer that could possibly make that right. The businessman felt his throat closing up. He shoved his hand in his pocket, fumbled with his keys, his watch. He wanted to give money. He wanted to promise the world. But it wouldn't be enough. He studied the details, the way the boy fixed the makeshift pillow, the scuffs on ancient sneakers, the doll patched with tape. Everything there told a story of someone who never got a choice, who lost their mother young, who just wanted a miracle, a gesture from someone outside their hell. The wind picked up. Isabela coughed again, now a dry sound that seemed to cut the air. Rafael woke with a start. Looked at Artur, like a silent scream. "Please help me." This time, Artur didn't look away. He felt the full weight on his shoulders. His heart sent a warning, you either do something now, or that girl won't make it through another night in this world. And right then, he decided he wouldn't walk away the same as he'd come. Slowly, Artur understood what no one had ever taught him. Compassion isn't pity, it's the courage to see someone's pain and take responsibility for it. He didn't just see two miserable faces. He saw his own past, the ghost in his mansion, the hollowness after his wife's death, everything mixed in with Rafael's silent courage. Under that bridge, life seemed suspended in a waiting game. And deep down, everyone just wanted one thing, someone who wouldn't give up on them. Artur stood there a long moment, watching how Isabela trembled on that filthy mattress. Her face was so small, so thin, every cough seemed to wring out what little air she had left. Rafael tried to tuck the ragged blanket around his sister, glancing sideways at Artur, not sure if he should thank or shoo this hard-eyed stranger away. Only the sound of cars overhead, an occasional horn, or distant shouting broke the silence. The smell was suffocating. Artur took a deep breath, but it wasn't to smell anything more to remind himself how to breathe. He crouched down slowly so he wouldn't startle them, but just getting close made Rafael move in front, like a little protector even though he barely had any strength left. Rafael's feet were so dirty and raw it hurt to look at them. All his muscles were tense, ready for someone to snatch Isabela away at any moment. "I'm going to help," Artur said, low but firm. "I'll take her to the hospital." Waiting till morning could be too late. Rafael hugged Isabela tighter. He looked at his sister, looked at Artur, half desperate, half with no other option. His face was all seriousness, but his eyes shimmered with fear. He wanted to trust, but didn't know how. "But there are rules," Artur said, and you could hear in his voice this wasn't something he did often. It came out rough, as if he too was trying to put up a wall. "No lies. No tricks, no stories to fool me. I don't have patience for that." Rafael kept quiet. Tried to swallow, breathing through his mouth, words stuck in his throat. "I'm not trying to fool anyone," he muttered, his lips trembling. "I just want her to get better." Artur studied the girl's tiny hands, her cold fingers, and glanced at Rafael, all thin, worn out, barely a voice left. He didn't speak for a moment. It was a battle inside him, wanting to leave, wanting not to get involved. His face was all cold angles, but deep in his eyes there was a sadness he was trying and failing to hide. Isabela coughed again, hard, her whole body doubling up, and Rafael tried to hold her like he could keep the world at bay. "Let me carry her," Artur said. "We need to go now." Rafael stood still. He wasn't afraid of the hospital. He was afraid of losing his sister, of someone taking her away, never bringing her back. But after one more cough, after seeing Isabela nearly pass out, he just nodded. Slow, like the world was moving in slow motion. Artur knelt. His expensive suit was instantly caked in mud. He didn't seem to care, but looked at Isabela with the careful touch of someone afraid of breaking something fragile. He scooped her up, and it was clear from the way he moved. He'd done this before, maybe when his wife was still alive. But now he was scared of feeling that pain again. Rafael got to his feet but didn't look away from his sister for even a second. He walked so close behind that he was almost Artur's shadow. They left the shelter beneath the bridge. Cold air bit at their skin, a swirl of wind and exhaust fumes. The wet ground soaked Rafael's feet even worse, but he hardly seemed to notice. He kept looking toward the parked black car, the open door, Isabela in the stranger's arms. Fear was stronger than cold. On the way to the car, Artur's mind raced a million miles. He saw people passing by, some stopping to stare, others pretending not to see. His face was stern, but he held Isabela like the world itself could shatter if he loosened his grip even a little. His coat was warm, buttoned up tight, but his eyes gave him away, full of emptiness, longing, a weight that money couldn't fix. Rafael stumbled, exhausted, but he didn't complain. What hurt wasn't his body, but the possibility of being left alone again, abandoned with his fear. "Promise me you'll help," Rafael suddenly asked, barely above a whisper, looking up at Artur. Artur looked at him, a little surprised at the question. He wasn't used to someone being so direct, so small and yet so fierce. "I promise," Artur said, this time more slowly. "But you'll need to trust me too. No lying. If you do your part, I'll do mine." Rafael simply nodded. He wasn't happy, wasn't safe. But there was a glimmer of hope in his eyes, a spark missing for so long. They climbed into the car. The seat smelled of new leather, a stark contrast to the dirty blanket wrapped around Isabela. For a moment, the place felt like another planet to Rafael. He looked around, suspicious, trying to seem brave. Artur settled Isabela in the back, propping her head on his arm. The car heater warmed the space quickly, and only then did Rafael feel the ache in his icy feet. All his muscles stayed on high alert, ready if anything went wrong. Before starting the car, Artur glanced in the rearview mirror. His face was still hard, but a crack showed through, something different, something about to break. He took a deep breath, fixed his gaze on the road, and in that split second, it was clear. This time, it wasn't just business. It was personal, no matter how much it hurt. The car pulled out, cutting through São Paulo's cold night. In the back, Rafael squeezed his sister's hand, every bit of pressure saying what he couldn't put into words. Artur's car felt like another world, muffled and soft, seats that seemed to swallow you up. Outside, the city ran in blurry streaks down the rain-soaked windows, streetlights melting into long lines. Out there, it was gray and freezing. Inside, it was warm, but the heat didn't chase away the fear. Isabela was on his lap, sleeping, or almost sleeping. Her breathing was ragged, a strange wheeze rattling in her little chest, skinny arms clinging to a battered toy. Sometimes she hiccuped, sometimes she coughed. Every time her chest heaved in that weird way, Rafael held his own breath, like his heart was slipping away inside him. Artur drove with both hands gripped tight on the wheel. He didn't say a word, just stared straight ahead, his face lit by headlights slicing fast across the glass. Sometimes he glanced into the mirror, but didn't speak to Rafael. He looked angry, or lost. Every so often, his hand trembled slightly on the gear shift. Rafael sat at the very edge of the back seat, back ramrod straight, eyes fixed on Isabela. He didn't let go of her shoulders for even a second. He just worried if she had a fever, if they'd let them both into the hospital, if the man driving would really help or just vanish at the first chance. He couldn't trust. He dared not trust. The silence was strange. Rafael missed the bridge's endless noise, coughing, dogs barking, honking, shouting, the sound of liquor sloshing on the ground. Ugly as it was familiar. In Artur's car, the silence was thick, heavy, making you feel lonely even with people right next to you. When the car pulled up by the hospital curb, Rafael felt a knot in his chest. That kind of fear you can't even name? That's what he felt now. The tall white gates, security guards at the door, harsh light striking deep shadows on the faces of those waiting. Rafael hesitated to get out, but Isabela groaned quietly and he knew he couldn't stand still. Artur got out fast and, without a word, cradled Isabela in his arms again. She didn't protest, just turned her tired face to Rafael, tried to smile, but coughed. Rafael followed, fist clenched, tumbling on his own fear. He walked through the hospital doors, wide-eyed, feeling the guards watching. Inside, it was like another planet. Cold white lights, the rhythm of shoes on tile, people rushing by in hospital scrubs. That sharp scent of medicine and despair. Everything so clean, so sterile, so far from street life. Rafael clutched Isabella's toy and tried not to cry. He'd never cried in front of strangers. Artur spoke quietly to the woman at reception, showed an ID, whispered something. His voice wasn't pleading, it was commanding. The attendant's look changed from weary to worried, and she called someone on her radio, waved down a nurse. Rafael understood none of it, just felt the fear swelling. When they told Isabela to lie on a gurney, Rafael nearly jumped in front. But Artur put a hand on his shoulder, firm but gentle. Said, "She'll be all right." Just that. Rafael stood unsure, watching as Isabela was wheeled away by a nurse in a lab coat. He wanted to run after, but his legs wouldn't move. The corridor was long, white, freezing. The floor gleamed. You could almost see his tired reflection. As they walked, crying children wailed behind closed doors. Elderly folks slept in wheelchairs. And Isabela only wanted to close her eyes, but the nurse asked her to stay awake, asked her name, stroked her messy hair, trying to smile. "You'll be okay, sweetheart," she said, voice tinged with sadness. Rafael stole anxious glances at Artur, expecting him to leave, waiting for the worst. But Artur just stood in the hallway, hands in his pockets, foot tapping the floor as if he didn't know what to do. The suit was expensive, dark, but in that moment, it meant nothing. His face stayed rigid, but the look in his eyes was different, lost, afraid. For a second, Rafael thought the man might actually cry. When they put an oxygen mask on her, Isabela gripped Rafael's finger. She tried to smile, but her lips trembled and her eyes almost drifted shut. Rafael felt the world vanish, leaving only the harsh white light glaring down on his sister and the urge to scream. He didn't like hospitals, didn't like rich men, didn't like any of this. But now, there was nothing he could do. Artur speaks to a doctor, explains quickly, his face serious. The doctor picks Isabela up, asks her age, checks her skin color, listens to her chest. Everyone moves fast, talks in hushed tones, as if time is running out. The nurse asks Rafael if his mother is coming soon. He drops his eyes, doesn't answer. He just holds out his worn-out toy. Artur shakes his head, as if searching for the right words, but gives up. Deep down, Rafael feels like everything depends on adults now. He hates it. He's always taken care of Isabela by himself, always found a way, one way or another. Now he sees his little sister disappearing into a room full of wires, and he feels like he's lost all control. His chest aches, his hand trembles. The clock in the hallway goes tick-tock, a sound Rafael never noticed before. He feels cold, even in the stuffy hospital heat. Artur sits in a chair, runs his hands over his face, breathes deeply. He looks tired, maybe even regretful. Suddenly, he glances at Rafael, tries to speak, but only manages to ask, "Will she pull through?" Rafael doesn't answer. He just bows his head, bites the grimy sleeve of his coat, and closes his eyes. The smell of the hospital mixes with the taste of fear in his mouth. No one says anything for a while. All you can hear is Isabela's oxygen hissing, the nurse's footsteps, a distant cry. There, in that white hallway, Rafael feels that everything can change. For better or for worse, no one knows. All he can do is wait, clutching his battered toy. And for the first time, he lets the tears fall for real, right there, on the shiny hospital floor, beside the man who might save Isabela or not. The doctor comes in quietly, with that weary look of someone who's seen too much hardship. She stops in front of Artur, glances quickly at the boy sitting in the hard plastic chair beside the gurney, then at Isabela, who sleeps pale, her cough rattling softly deep in her chest. In the hospital, the clock barely seems to move. Low voices drift through the hallway, the cold seeping through the glass, the harsh light glaring over everything. Rafael squeezes his hands, fingers icy with nerves, rubbing his skin as if trying to wake up from a nightmare. Artur inhales deeply, trying to keep his composure, that businesslike posture of a man in control. But the scene rips him up inside. Rafael, thinner than he ought to be, holding his sister's hand and whispering something only the two of them understand. The boy acts brave, but his eyes are brimming with fear. He stares, unblinking, at the doctor's face, hoping for anything, just a hint of hope, a bit of news that won't be the end of their world. The doctor bends down, meeting Rafael at eye level. Her lab coat makes a dry rustle against the chair. Rafael, that's your name, right? She says gently, as if every word weighs something. The boy just nods. He can't even muster the courage to answer out loud. Your sister. Isabela has a pretty serious problem, son. She's got a rare disease. The doctor sighs. Her little lungs haven't worked right since she was little. Now it's gotten worse because she's been without medicine, without proper food, without protection from the cold. Rafael's eyes widen. His chin quivers, but he tries to hold on. He looks at Artur, searching for approval or just a friendly glance. But Artur stands there, frozen, swallowing hard. The doctor keeps going. There's a new treatment, Rafael. It could give your little sister a good chance to get better. But the silence is bigger than any hospital's sound. It feels like time is standing still. It's a very expensive treatment, she says, looking awkwardly at Artur. At that, Rafael's face crumples. Like he'd been trying to hold back tears for weeks, but can't take it anymore. First, he drops his head, biting his lips until they almost bleed. Then, tears spill down, mixing dirt and sweat as they drip to his chin. And then he really cries. Quiet, at first, just a trapped sob. Then it grows, and he can't hold it in anymore. He wraps his arms around his sister, through the blanket, like he could shield her from everything. Is she going to die? He asks, his voice nearly a whisper, thick with fear. The doctor shakes her head, trying to tell the truth without making it hurt more. If things stay like this, it could get very dangerous, Rafael. But if she gets the treatment, there's a really strong chance she'll recover. She's tough, just like her brother. She just needs a chance. Artur stands watching. The man who could buy almost anything with a phone call now finds himself lost, face to face with two siblings who've lost everything. No family, sleeping under bridges, surviving like little grown-ups. For a moment, you can see it in his eyes, a mess of anger and helplessness. Anger at everyone who pretends not to notice kids suffering at the traffic lights. Helplessness because, for the first time, money alone doesn't seem worth anything next to sheer fear. His chest tightens. Artur's eyes are red, but he won't let anyone see. He runs his hand through his hair, tries to conceal the trembling in his fingers. He hears Rafael's muffled sobbing and, for the first time, he has no urge to bolt from the room or fix everything with a money transfer. The doctor puts a hand on Rafael's shoulder, squeezing gently. I'll help take care of her now, okay? You can trust me. We just need this treatment. And she looks at Artur with a plea for mercy. Rafael wipes his face, but can't stop shaking. He looks straight at Artur, as if all hope had been transferred to that strange man in his expensive suit. Mister, will you help Isabela? He asks. His voice wavers, but there's an edge in it that cuts through the air. Artur doesn't answer right away. He just stands there, staring at his hands. He feels the chill of the hospital, so different from the cold inside his own chest. He wonders what life has made him, someone closed off, used to saying no, so he doesn't get hurt again. The urge to retreat comes back. But Rafael's image, sitting there destroyed, eyes swollen from crying, won't leave his mind. That crumpled note, that desperate plea, echoes in his memory like a debt of the soul. On the gurney, Isabela coughs, not quite waking up. Her whole little body shakes. Her eyes, half open, search for her brother even in her sleep. The sound of that crying, those coughs, stings harder than any tough business meeting. Time drags on. Artur looks at the boy again. He's not sure what to believe, but he also doesn't know how to just walk away and pretend he never met these two. The hallway feels colder. That medication smell, the glaring white of the walls, everything mixes with the sense that their lives are hanging by a thread, and now that thread is in his hands. The doctor comes back and says Isabela will be taken for more tests. Rafael holds her tiny hand until the very last moment. He cries in silence, but Artur hears every sob, feels each ragged breath. The man looks at the doctor, then the boy, then the door, as if, in that brief instant, he still has the choice to turn away and pretend he never heard any of this. But there are some things you can't unsee once you've seen them. And at that moment, something inside Artur starts to change. The Mello mansion is different that night. It doesn't feel like the same place anymore. The smell of polished wood is still there, but the air is heavy, as if someone left a window open in winter and the cold crept in uninvited. There's a strange tension, every step echoing on the floor. Everyone seems angry, suspicious, glancing sideways. Artur came home with two strange kids, dropped everything to rush to the hospital. He returned much later, with Isabela admitted and Rafael huddled on the waiting room chair, smaller than ever. He's hardly spoken to anyone since. Bad news travels fast, doesn't it? And in the mansion, it didn't take long for whispers to turn into outright arguments. Cousins raising their voices, uncles in the TV room, a couple of maids gossiping with sour faces in the hall. One harsh phrase struck. He fell for a scam, for sure. Upstairs, you could hear everything. Did you see this? Out of nowhere, he brings these two kids. The stories you hear. Honestly, the aunt complained, not even bothering to whisper. Those street families make up illnesses, they lie. He's going to lose everything to those people. I've never seen Mr. Artur like this, one of the maids confided in the kitchen. Even the driver, old Geraldo, turned into a tragedy expert. Any day now, they'll be selling the house. But no one seemed to ask themselves why Artur was acting like that. He couldn't explain it himself. All he knew was that every bitter sentence hurt, even if he pretended not to hear. At dinner, he sat at the table, stared at his plate, poked at his rice. He tried to take a bite, then set the fork down and walked out. No one followed him. He went in his office and locked the door. Inside, the silence was thick. He switched on the lamp, tossed his blazer on a chair, and looked at his reflection in the dark window, a tired face, deep shadows under his eyes, looking a good 20 years older. On the desk, Rafael's note was still there, crumpled, the edges a little damp. He opened the paper slowly, smoothing it with the palm of his hand, reading the scrawled, hurried words. Please save my sister. I'll do anything. He stood there staring, feeling something weird knotting up his fingers, as if he were holding something sacred. He shut his eyes for a second, breathed deeply, felt the weight settling in his chest. It had been a long time since he'd felt this way, like everything was spinning out of control, or maybe pulling him back to a painful place he'd tried to forget. Everyone had always thought of him as cold, a money-making machine, a man of decisions, never a heart. Maybe he'd chosen that. Maybe just to avoid feeling. Flashes of the day tumbled through his head. The boy standing in the hospital, dirty hand holding Isabela's, the eyes that begged for help but still resisted, afraid of losing more. It's different when you see a child's face asking for so little. It wasn't money, it wasn't charity, it was real desperation. There's something true in a voice on the edge. The mansion felt emptier than ever. Artur thought of his parents, those crowded dinners, the Sundays when the house was noisy and alive, laughter spilling on the veranda, dessert after lunch. Now, only the sound of rain hammering the window, and the harsh voices of relatives echoing in his mind. Wake up, Artur. This is a made-up story. You're going to throw away years of work for two strangers. What, are you going to open the doors to just anyone now? He could almost answer, I know. I'm scared too. But he couldn't say it out loud, not even to himself. Looking at the note again, he noticed something. Something about the handwriting. A name almost erased down at the bottom. He didn't know what it was yet. Doubt grew. It didn't make sense for that boy to make all this up. Not like that. Not after what they'd seen at the hospital, on the street, under the bridge. There was real pain in those eyes. What if he'd been wrong all along? What if his family's constant suspicion, this fear of getting hurt, had built a wall keeping anything good out? What if he was just repeating the cycle, shutting out people who were already hurting, plugging his ears so he wouldn't have to listen to a real plea? His phone pinged, a text from a cousin. So you're giving money to beggars now? Think you're a priest. Artur nearly threw the phone across the room. He felt like running out, slamming doors, vanishing. He felt angry, but mostly just exhausted. He knew he wouldn't sleep that night. He didn't want to. He paced around the office, stopped in front of old family photos on the shelf. In one, he was a small boy, sitting on Donna Rose's lap, the old housekeeper, always with the same gentle smile. That memory made his heart pinch. She was the only real face then, the only warm one in a cold house. His eyes landed on the note again. The detail that was bothering him now seemed to shout. A letter, a name almost erased in the corner. Deja vu was it? His heavy hands fell into his lap. He was scared both of discovering a lie and of finding a truth that hurt even more. Outside, the storm got worse. The wind howled at the windows. All night, it felt like the world was trying to invade the house, to sweep everything away. Artur stood there in the dark, the lamplight timid and the crumpled note between his fingers, feeling the weight of the past coming back, pressing for answers, knowing there was no turning back. And somewhere across the city, Rafael probably wasn't sleeping either, clutching Isabela's hand in her cold hospital bed, hoping that, just this once, a promise wouldn't be broken. The mansion was still full of bitter voices, but inside that office, there was only silence. And a lost man trying to gather the scattered pieces of a story that, maybe, was his as well. The house was quiet, but it wasn't a good kind of peace. It was one of those silences that only comes when something hard has happened. Outside, the wind rattled the mansion's windows, whistling against the glass. Artur stayed alone in the office, in a dimly lit corner, just the yellow lamp above the desk, throwing big shadows on the wall. The boy's note sat there, crumpled, stained at the edges with rain and earth. He picked the paper up again, ran his finger slowly over the line written with an old pen. Please save my sister, I'll do anything. His heart found new ways to hurt every time he read it. But this time, something else caught his eye. Down in the bottom corner, smudged, there was a name. He squinted into the light, bringing it closer. It looked like someone had written it and then nearly rubbed it out, like they were trying to hide it. But it was still readable. Suddenly, Artur felt a cold tremor shoot down his back. It was a name he knew. A family name, the kind you remember only if you've lived in a house for a long, long time. It was the same name as the old housekeeper, the one who took care of him when he was little, Dona Rosa. Artur's heart skipped unevenly. It couldn't be just a coincidence. She wasn't just any maid. She was the one who held his hand when he was sick, made him tea for his fever, who could soothe the terror of thunderstorms. He kept staring at the paper, his finger trembling ever so slightly, nearly invisible if someone was watching. It was a mix of shock and longing for a time so far away. He tried to remember. How long since he'd thought of Dona Rosa? Decades, maybe. She'd left the house after a while, when things changed. When Artur's mother got sick, the memory was fuzzy, but the feeling was all there, packed into that wobbly scrawled name. He thought of Rafael, of the way the boy had looked at him in the hospital doorway, not with anger or cunning, but with a deep fear, the kind that comes from not believing in anything anymore, yet asking anyway, because it's the last chance. He remembered the hollow eyes, the dirty face, the desperate love for his sister, and now, that name jumping out of memory, as if all the pieces were finally sliding together. What if it wasn't a coincidence? What if this boy wasn't just asking for a favor, but giving back a piece of Artur's lost life? His relatives' voices still echoed sharp through the house. You're falling for a scam, going to waste a fortune on these kids, and you don't even know who they are. But now, with that name there, Artur couldn't just close up the note and forget, like he'd tried to before. He ran his hands over his face, feeling rough stubble, and stood up heavily, staring out at the dark, chilly night. He picked up his phone, hesitated a few seconds before dialing. Was Dona Rosa still alive? Did she remember him? Did she keep any part of that time? Or had she buried it all away, the way people do with big pains? One ring, two. Nothing. Artur looked at the clock, realized it was nearly dawn, and called again anyway. When he finally heard a frail, tired voice on the other end, his heart squeezed in a strange way, as if his whole childhood had come flooding back in an instant. Hello? Dona Rosa. Her voice was sweet, slow. She recognized him right away, calling him little Artur, like no time had passed at all. Just hearing her made him want to cry, but he kept steady, cleared his throat, tried to find the right words. He didn't mention the note right away. Just asked about her health, said he needed her to clear up something from the past. He explained it was urgent, that it had to do with a couple of children. Dona Rosa's voice turned more worried, said she could come by first thing in the morning. He knew where to find her. Silence pressed down after she hung up. The clock seemed louder than before, marking every second as he imagined the pieces of the puzzle arranging themselves on their own in front of him. In the dark hallway, he passed the living room, where the smell of old coffee lingered from the closed kitchen. He stopped, looking at the emptiness, memories of being a lonely little boy in a huge, warm house. A time when Dona Rosa baked cakes on Sunday afternoons, and her laughter mixed with all the house's noises. Now, the past pressed hard against his chest. If Rafael really was Dona Rosa's grandson, if fate had put that family back in his path like this, why now of all times? Why that sick little girl, that boy looking at him as a last hope? Why did they land in his life, tangled in so much old pain? He tried to lie down, but couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned in his expensive bed, listening to the wind outside as if someone was pounding on the door, as if the world itself was pushing him to move. He closed his eyes and saw again the sad faces of Rafael and Isabela. So he whispered a prayer, maybe for the first time in years, that the truth would finally make sense of it all, would help save not only those children but maybe the lost boy he himself had once been. The night gave no rest. Artur waited for daybreak, more certain each minute that this wasn't just charity, not just an excess of feeling. It was something else, something that hurt, that cried out for an answer, something he needed to repair, or maybe rescue, before it was too late for everyone. The living room was nearly silent, only interrupted now and then by the old wall clock. The air smelled of cold coffee, a stale bread loaf forgotten in the corner of the table. Dona Rosa sat there, hands marked by time, her eyes never leaving Artur since he arrived. It was as if she sensed something important was coming. He, always so controlled, was fidgeting with his fingers, trying to hide the tightness in his chest, but he couldn't mask it. He stared at the floor, as if searching for answers in the wormwood. He took a deep breath before he spoke, nearly voiceless, holding out the battered note Rafael had handed him, almost like it was a chunk ripped from his own heart. Dona Rosa took the paper, pressed it in her fingers, trying to read the faded name at the bottom. Her eyes filled with tears, a different kind of sadness. That name. It's my daughter's, Mr. Artur. Rafael's mother was my girl. In that instant, a heavy silence fell so thick the clock itself seemed to stop. Artur felt his heart as if punched. Everything around him faded, as if time was rewinding, a child's laughter echoing through the mansion halls, a woman in a white uniform playing with him. It was her, Dona Rosa's daughter. The one who sat beside him when he had no one to talk to, when grown-ups didn't care about a rich, lonely child's pain. Strange how memory comes washed out, but so real. Artur remembered the smell of pudding, the dish towel in Dona Rosa's hands, her gentle care, especially after his mother died. Now he was here, all these years later, feeling like a piece of that childhood was returning, only battered, abandoned, in Rafael's eyes. Dona Rosa started to cry softly, her shoulders shaking. She spoke quietly, almost whispering, telling how her daughter ran away young, chasing freedom, a better life far from that mansion's invisible cages. She never came back, wrote just a few times, and then vanished for good. And now, fate had brought her grandson to Artur's door, begging for help, not even knowing who he really was. Artur didn't say a word. His throat burned. It felt like all their stories were tangled together now, his mother, forgotten in old photographs, Dona Rosa, made of strength and longing, her lost daughter, and now those two children with nowhere to go, living under a bridge. This wasn't just pity. This was guilt. This was weight, an old emptiness he hadn't realized he still carried. My dear. Forgive me, Dona Rosa said, her hands trembling as she clutched the note. I never saw my daughter again. Never imagined, never for a second, that my grandkids would end up like that. She looked into Artur's eyes, brimming now with unshed tears. He wanted to ask so much. When did everything go wrong? Why didn't anyone know? But he was silent, just breathing heavily, realizing this was bigger than any family quarrel, bigger than the cold shell he'd used all his life to protect himself. It was as if all those years of loneliness, his and the children's, were now standing hand in hand. He wondered if the universe plays these cruel tricks to teach us something, if there's a deeper reason. He couldn't put a name to what he felt, just that it wasn't charity anymore. It was family. It was blood. That simple note had made it to his hands because it had to. This story was never just about two orphans selling candy in the cold. Dona Rosa stood up slowly to hug Artur. For a moment, he remained stiff, perched on the edge of the chair, but then his shoulders slumped, and he closed his eyes, letting the embrace happen, as if it was the first time anyone had hugged him for real in years. They stayed that way, sharing the pain and the shock. His mind spun. He imagined Rafael seated on that hard hospital bench, biting his lips to keep from crying. He remembered Isabela, so tiny, struggling to breathe, eyes haunted with fever. All this belonged to him now. There was no running. When Dona Rosa let go, wiping her tears on her sleeve, she looked at him again different, now. There was respect, hope, and a fierce desire to protect what was left of her daughter, of the past, of all she'd lost. Out in the city, nobody knew a thing. The wind swept cold along the window, cars rushing across wet asphalt far away, unaware of the sad, beautiful miracle unfolding in that dark room. Artur knew what he had to do. It wasn't a choice. It was just love, the kind that outlives time, families, fear. Deep inside, something was growing as if, for the first time in years, he truly wasn't alone. That night, Artur learned that sometimes the ones most in need of saving are ourselves. And that fate, sometimes, sends miracles to the exact right address when you least expect it. Artur stood there in the hospital's white corridor, hands shoved in his pockets, eyes fixed on the floor, as if he couldn't figure out what to do with everything he was feeling. Outside, rain pounded the windows, noise mixing with distant horns and sirens. Here, there was only silence, broken now and then by Isabela's thin cough from her room or Rafael's quiet weeping as he tried to be brave, hunched in a plastic chair, little fists clenched so tight his nails bit into his own skin. The doctors explained everything again, with all those complicated words. But what stuck was, the treatment's expensive, it's hard, it'll take time, but she could get better. Through it all, Artur felt a strange urge to finally do the right thing after so very long. Stronger than his own fear was the pleading in Rafael's eyes. A boy carrying the weight of the world, already old before his time, exhausted, but still clinging to hope as tightly as he held his sister. Artur leaned back against the wall, face tense. After all he learned about their past, his heart beat differently. Standing there, he understood he was out of excuses. He'd never been good at hugs or sweet words, but at that moment, all he could think was, never again will anyone leave you behind. Never. The bedroom door creaked open and Rafael stepped out, his face flushed, his eyes dry. He looked at Artur with caution, the way someone calculates just how far they're allowed to dream. They stared at each other for a few seconds, neither quite sure what to say. The doctor said there's a medicine. Rafael's voice faltered, barely above a whisper. But I don't have any more cash. Or anything else. Silence hung heavy between them. From the bedroom came the soft sound of Isabela sleeping, her breath strained. Artur took a deep breath. Inside, he felt everything at once, anger at life, a desperate urge to run away, but also a huge tenderness for these two lost children. He crouched down, looking Rafael directly in the eye, unhurried, as if trying to say everything without words. You're coming with me. Both of you. He spoke slowly, careful not to scare him. I'm going to take care of you. I won't let your sister go without. Or you. Suddenly, Rafael's mask cracked. He tried to hold back his tears, but couldn't manage it. A fat tear rolled down his cheek, the kind that burns from shame. He looked like he didn't believe it, braced for another disappointment. But, you're not going to disappear? It was more than just a doubt. It was fear mixed with a hope so fierce it almost hurt. You're not going to leave us like everyone else? Artur saw all of this, and, for the first time in years, he felt small. The rich man, who had everything, couldn't answer the simple question of a boy who had nothing but his sister in his arms and a crumpled promise on a scrap of paper. The silence grew tighter, the kind that aches in your chest. That was when Artur opened his arms, awkwardly, and pulled Rafael close. The boy pressed against his chest, trembling as if he were scared even of this embrace. Artur held him tight, as if he could erase all those years of abandonment, every cold night, every fear. Never again, he murmured softly, cupping Rafael's head in his big hand. I promise. I'll never abandon you. The boy gasped, sobbing, clutching at Artur's shirt with his thin hands, as if clinging to his last chance at survival. For a few seconds, there was only the sound of his crying and the wind blowing outside. A nurse passed down the corridor and glanced at them, offering a sad smile, noticing that there was more hope in that embrace than in any medicine. Then came the papers, adoption, commitments, signatures. Artur decided, right there in front of everyone, with a steady voice, that yes, they were his now as family. People didn't quite believe it, but he didn't care anymore. With every page he signed, he felt a tremor inside, a mix of fear and happiness, like a new beginning, like faith. Rafael was holding Isabela's hand. She was awake now, her little arm bandaged with cotton. She gave him a weak smile, glancing back and forth between him and the big man who was going to take her away from there. The little girl whispered, barely above a breath, Mister, are you coming with us? Artur knelt beside them, gently touched her head, his whole face melting, tears in his eyes he tried to hide. He didn't know how to pray, but in that cold hospital corridor, it felt like that's what he was doing, in his own way. He looked at both of them, a promise shining in his exhausted eyes. We're going home together. We're family now. Rafael smiled through his tears, almost as if surprised, like he'd forgotten how. He kept whispering, trembling with relief, doubting and grateful all at once. Thank you, until his voice faded into a tight embrace for all three, blending the smell of hospital, sweat, hope, and the faintest trace of a miracle. That's where everything changed. No luxury yet, no perfect future, but finally, there was human warmth. The emptiness Artur had carried all his life started to dissolve, little by little, each gesture, every tear. And Rafael, with his head pressed to the strong arm of the stranger who was now a father, understood that maybe, just maybe, it was safe to trust. There was already a difference, you could feel it in the air, in how Rafael gripped Isabela's little hand on the car ride. It wasn't fear, not this time. It was something lighter, hope tinged with the sweet nervousness of stepping into a brand new world. Artur glanced at the two of them in the rearview mirror, lost in the silence. Even the driver seemed less tense, maybe because he could hear soft giggles from the back seat. Isabela, after the medicine, slept with her mouth open, messy hair plastered to her cheek, thumb stuck in the corner of her lips. Rafael stroked her arms so gently, like he was protecting the world's last treasure. When the mansion gates opened, the heavy clang of iron felt like an announcement. The life of fear was over. The house, so huge and full of lights, no longer seemed cold the way Artur remembered. It was as if every lamp burning said, "Welcome home." Inside, a blonde woman with a ponytail and a motherly air was waiting, wearing a genuine smile. "Hi, Rafael." "Hi, Isa. I'm Lucia." Just hearing the name brought tears to Rafael's eyes. It was the same as his mother's. Isabela woke up in Rafael's lap, wiped her nose with the back of her hand, and looked around, confused. She saw that giant living room, thick carpet, soft sofa, the smell of cake in the air. And for the first time in a long while, she grinned unabashedly, revealing little gaps between her teeth. "Is this our home now?" she asked quietly. Artur knelt beside them, a bit awkward. He'd never been good with words or hugs. He put his hand on Rafael's back and looked him in the eye. "Yes, it is. You'll never be cold again." You could see the struggle in Artur's eyes as he fought to keep his emotions in check. No one spoke for a few seconds. Just the distant sound of rain against the windows, but inside, everything was warm. Lucia scooped Isabela into her arms, showing her the bedrooms, the bathroom, toys that had been stored away for years. Rafael wandered slowly through the hallways, his thin clothes and bare feet making him hesitant to dirty such a spotless floor. Artur watched from a distance, careful, afraid to frighten him. It hurt to see how a boy so small could carry such weight on his face. But now things were changing, getting lighter every time Isabela laughed, tried a drawer, played with a stuffed animal. Rafael, leaning against a wall, watched it all, a bit lost. When Rafael picked up an old toy car from the shelf and spun the wheels with his finger, Artur sat down beside him. "You know, that car was mine when I was your age," he said softly. Rafael wasn't sure if it was true, but managed a tight little smile. Isabela came bouncing up, hugging a teddy bear as if it had always been part of the family. "Look, Rafa, it's ours now." Her voice was hoarse and low from exhaustion, but so full of joy that even Lucia wiped away tears with her shirt sleeve. They had dinner together at the big table, warm yellow light, real food, beans, rice, the smell of good seasoning. Rafael gazed at the food, waiting for permission to eat. Artur spent a moment just pushing his fork around, unsure what to say, until he slid the plate toward the boy. "Eat. It's all yours now. You don't have to ask permission to be happy." Rafael looked at Isabela, then at Artur, still not quite believing. Hunger was fierce, but shame even fiercer. Gradually, he ate. Each spoonful broke down a barrier. After dinner, Lucia whisked Isabela off for a bath, promising a warm pair of pajamas. Rafael stayed alone with Artur in the living room. The silence felt strange. Artur took a deep breath and looked into the boy's eyes. "I lost someone very important too," he confessed, his voice rough, faltering a little. "And for a long time, I thought I'd never feel happy in here again." He touched his chest, over his heart. "But today I know that miracles are real." Rafael lowered his gaze and squeezed the crumpled note he still kept in his pocket, the one he'd written in desperation days before. When he felt Artur's hand rest softly on his shoulder, he didn't pull away this time. He stayed there, allowing himself that new affection, letting go of his fear. A little later, Isabela came back smelling of soap, her hair combed with a pink ribbon, teddy bear in hand, cheeks rosied, pajamas far too big for her. She jumped into Artur's lap without hesitation, hugging his neck and giggling. Her laughter was contagious and soon spread to everyone. Rafael, not realizing it, laughed too, a shy laugh, but a real one. Artur looked at the two of them, his heart so full it felt ready to burst. He closed his eyes for a moment, grateful for what he had. He wiped away a tear that wouldn't stay hidden. "From today on, we're a family," he promised softly. Rafael let his head rest on Artur's shoulder. And there, in the middle of that embrace, they left their painful past outside. Inside, there was no cold, no hunger, no fear. Only hope. Only love. And for the first time, looking out the window, the world seemed like a possible place. Together, Rafael, Isabela, and Artur, they finally believed that miracles do exist. And that, together, they could do anything.